Hello, my name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Woe. So, Project Poirot keeps on rolling along, and this week we have Evil Under the Sun. Now, quick disclaimer, filming a couple of videos here in batch. My sound is weird, my lighting's weird. Sorry about it, I think we'll all be okay. But anyway, Project Poirot, if you have never seen one of these videos before, just for some context, I do not do spoilers. I will take you up roundabouts to when we find a body, and I will get into some character details, just not giving anything away, I don't think, if you don't already know the solution. But if you consider either of those things to be spoilers, consider yourself warned. But otherwise, I think you should be able to watch this and still enjoy the book if you've not read it. So with that, let's dive into a quick little plot synopsis. Fun times. So Evil Under the Sun takes place in a holiday, private island that has a hotel on it off the coast of Devon, and I believe the hotel is called the Jolly Roger, which is, good fun and kind of alludes to the piratical history of the island and of the cove that is on that island. And it is Hercule Poirot's vacation, he's on holiday. This book was written in 1941, but I think it is actually, you're made to believe, set in the late 30s, let's call it 1938-ish. And this island has been updated. Somebody comments on, oh, look, they have running water and plumbing and stuff, which I guess is an upgrade to, a hole in the floor. But anyway, it does have that, but there are not phones on this island. You have to go into the little town nearby called Lethercombe Bay, and there's one or two phones in there. But yeah, so it's a pretty remote place, and because it's the late 30s, it does not have all of the amenities that it might today. So anyway, Hercule Poirot is staying there. There's a lot of guests that we meet. I say a lot. There's probably 12 guests that we meet, some of whom include the gardeners, who are this crazy American couple, and the woman will not shut up. She just sits there and babbles all day long, and her husband is just sort of resigned to his fate, and it just always says yes darling to whatever she says. There's an old Anglo-Indian colonel, or major in this case, because Agatha Christie loves those, and he is, xenophobic as per usual. I think it's called Major Barry, that sounds right. And then there's a kind of maidenly, school mistress, I think she's a sporting mistress at a boarding school, I forget. She's something like that. I think her name is Miss Brewster. And then there are two couples. That's really the other main guest. So there's two couples. There's the Redferns, Patrick and Christine Redfern, and they are an attractive younger couple. There seems to be some trouble in paradise, however, because it appears that Patrick is infatuated with the wife of the other couple who is there, and that is Captain Marshall and Arlena Marshall. And Arlena is sort of she's described somewhat as a femme fatale. She's a redhead and very sultry. She's luring. Can you guys, sorry, my neighbors are blasting their music, and I don't think you can hear it, but maybe you can, because it just got much louder. Hopefully not. Anyway, if you feel like dancing while I'm summarizing, go for it. But anyway, Arlena is sort of femme fatale, and she is very kind of a man-eater. She's very into the attentions of men. Captain Marshall is kind of aware of this. She's sort of a serial cheater. But he also expresses that he has very conservative views about divorce. He doesn't believe in divorce. He kind of feels once you've made a decision, you gotta kind of go with it. So he's there. His daughter is with them, Linda Marshall. She's about 15 or 16. And then also I should mention the other guest who's around is Rosamond, and she is a childhood friend of Captain Marshall. They meet there by chance, and she is a very successful businesswoman. She owns her own dress shop and makes a very nice living doing that. So that's all the characters. Like I said, the main kind of intrigue at the beginning of the book is that it's very clear that Patrick Redfern is very infatuated with Arlena Marshall, and it's making his wife very mad. And essentially, that's what a lot of the kind of opening conflict centers around. Then, when we get to the mystery part of this book, eventually, Arlena is found dead in a very hard to get to beach. You either have to go down this epic flight of stairs that's going down this sheer cliff, or it's a small enough island that you can row all the way around it in about an hour or so. you can also reach it by boat. But she is eventually found dead by Miss Brewster and Patrick Redfern when they are going out essentially to look for her. Like, Patrick Redfern is trying to figure out where she went, and he's like looking around. So they find her dead in this cove, and then we have to figure out who done it. So that's sort of the setup. So in terms of my thoughts about this book, I love this one. This is like a very well-loved Christie. I think it's a well-known one. A lot of people suggest it as a good first Agatha Christie, and I definitely would agree with that. It is, I think, it's her doing a lot of what she does best, which is she's got this group of characters she really digs in, really gets into the psychology of them. It's got a lot of nice sort of like little twists, and it's a mystery where like timing, for instance, is very important. So it's one of those ones where figuring out the chronology of where everyone was at certain times is quite important. I should mention there's also some smuggling that has been happening with heroin. There you go. Welcome to the 1940s, apparently. Though we've had heroin a lot in these books. I think, I don't know, maybe it's just my prejudice against what feels like historical verisimilitude. But basically, it always is sort of jarring to me, like, oh, okay, I thought you guys had like opium, but like heroin. Okay. Anyway, so there's also some heroin smuggling that's been happening in the little cave in that on that private beach, and so there's also some intrigue around, like, could this be someone from the outside? Does it have to be one of the guests? Could it be like one of the smugglers? And a lot of what this book is Hercule Poirot finding clues and then like really hammering out the timeline. So if that's the kind of mystery you like, this could be for you. I should also mention that, I missed a couple of important characters, so let me also mention them real quick. So, or really, the one that I want to mention is Stephen Lane. He is a reverend. He's also somewhat infatuated with Arlena, but he's also very like fanatical and like obsessive about the idea of evil and resisting evil. And the reason I bring that up is because the title comes from a biblical allusion, which is from, I believe, Ecclesiastes, talking about like there is evil, all the evil under the sun, and Poirot mentions that, and Stephen Lane is like very like, yes. So that's a biblical allusion in the title, which is somewhat unusual for Christie. I should mention though, I don't think I did this in my review last week on 1, 2, Buckle My Shoe, but actually Poirot has like a revelation basically in church in the middle of saying one of the Psalms. So there's 2 books in a row now where there's some pretty important biblical allusions happening. So anyway, that's where the title comes from. And I think that this is a book, I think it's important to mention just sort of in the way that this book is talked about. This book has very close relationship to a to a novella that was in Murder in the Mews that I mentioned we would get to later. So that one is called Triangle at Rhodes. This is basically that plot over again, and we will see this. This is actually a plot she sort of tinkers with a few times. We'll see what I would argue are 2 more variations of this plot. I haven't seen this brought up as much, but to me these are all 4 of these stories are very closely related. So there was Triangle at Rhodes. Now we have Evil Under the Sun. There will be a Marple one called The Caribbean Mystery that has a very similar genetic structure in it, and then the other Poirot one that I think is quite similar is Dead Man's Folly. And these are all stories I really like. I think she does this particular plot quite well, and yeah, so if you've read one of them, you can kind of guess where any of them is going. But anyway, she definitely has like this particular plot line that she's playing with over and over again. I think we also see Agatha Christie have a lot of sort of like sympathetic imagination for women whose only real asset is their looks. I think Arlena, she's painted by a lot of the characters as a femme fatale, but I think Poirot increasingly gets the sense, and I think you as the reader do too, that she's actually quite a sad woman, because really she's not smart, and she can lure men in, but she can't keep them. Like, you see that over and over again in the way that they're talking about her past relationships. And I think it's telling that Agatha Christie doesn't have sort of what I think is also often stereotyped, the women responding to other women who are more beautiful than they are. There's a lot of stereotyping about, oh, like, you know, you're just jealous or whatever. I think Agatha Christie shows a lot of sort of like insight and sympathy for what Arlena might be feeling and thinking. And I think you also see that increasingly from Kenneth, from her husband, Captain Marshall, because you sort of feel like, why is he okay with her just cuckolding him all the time? And I think, you know, it's hard, you aren't sure, but I mean, I did, at least the first time I read this, I was like, I get the sense that he just sort of like gets what she is and is like, I made my bed, I have to lie in it. So anyway, I thought that was like, generally I feel like the gender politics of this book are quite interesting. And one final note on that is that, and kind of blending this also with just sort of some cultural commentary, is Patrick Redfern is infatuated with Arlena. They both have come to this place to have an affair, basically. And Poirot essentially very pointedly confronts Patrick Redfern about this and is like, hey, I don't understand, like, I do not understand why you would conduct this affair this way. Like, why did you bring your wife here? That was like, really, that was the wrong thing to do. And it's interesting because he's basically critiquing the way this affair is being carried on, not that there's an affair being carried on. And it's kind of painted under the auspices of, it's a difference between the French and the English, that the French, you know, are much more laissez-faire about that kind of a thing, but they understand that there's a certain amount of discretion you should be using, and you should not be bringing your wife along when you're trying to have an affair with your mistress. And Patrick Redfern's sort of blustery about that, but Poirot really sticks it to him in that moment of like, this is not how you should be doing this. So anyway, lots of, I think, kind of interesting explorations of the time, of the attitudes towards gender and kind of sexual politics and divorce and all that kind of stuff. So I thought that from that respect, this was quite an interesting book. I think it's interesting that she wrote this in the 40s, but she very intentionally set this back into the 30s so that she wouldn't have to deal with any World War II stuff. Now, to be fair, I guess this plot probably could not have happened when she was writing, because by then the Battle of Britain is definitely on, so people are not vacaying on the Devon coast by then, I wouldn't think. So maybe that's why she chose to do it. But anyway, it's interesting to me that there's really no references to any of the historical kind of milieu at this point, even though she's in one of the most significant historical moments of the 20th century. So there's none of that happening. There is, I think, an interesting kind of discussion that's brought up a few times about modern women's bathing attire and clothing in general. So Poirot starts the novel by sort of talking disgustedly about the fact that women are showing so much skin, and that they all seem so interchangeable because of that they all just seem like they're sort of he essentially says, like, this reminds me of the morgue in Paris. And kind of, I just thought that is a very striking critique. It's not so much a modesty issue for him, it's that he feels that the kind of universal exposure of skin deprives women of their individuality. And anyway, I just thought that was a really fascinating kind of reason to be unhappy with a women's swim attire, because you might think that he was gonna, you know, kind of launch into a tirade about how they needed to cover up, which is much more where Stephen Lane goes. But no, he's basically just, it's a critique of how anonymous it makes people seem. So there's that's sort of a discussion of like modern women's clothing, and another sort of allusion about, or discussion, it's overt, and I do not enjoy how this particular plotline is wrapped up, but there's sort of an ongoing discussion with Rosamond, who's this very successful entrepreneur, that she's having with Poirot about, are you judging me because I don't have a family? Don't you think that I should have a family? I'm just an old maid. Like, doesn't that negate my value? And he very wisely just declines to participate in that. But anyway, so there's sort of this ongoing discourse, both about modern women's clothing and about sort of just like women's place in the world in general is kind of under discussion at several points in the story. But aside from that, I don't really have a whole lot more to say about this, other than I think that it's a really good book, like one of her better ones. I gave this a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads, which is a 6 out of 7 unicorns on my scale. One that I just think is really excellent and really stands up to reading and rereading. I should also say that I've listened to this one and the previous one on audio, and I think they both work very well as audio. I would recommend them. I think the narrator in this one particularly nails the annoying American couple very well. I think that he really communicates that very effectively. So anyway, in terms of where I would rate this, I would put it towards the top. And I would also say that, like 1-2 Buckle My Shoe from last week, I think this is another really great place to start with Agatha Christie if you've never read anything from her. So I recommend this in and of itself, and I also recommend it as an entry point if you're intrigued by the plot and are looking to give Agatha Christie a try. So I think that's going to do it for this installment of Project Poirot. Next week's, I believe, is called 5 Little Pigs here in the US, or Murder in Retrospect elsewhere. But anyway, I also remember it being pretty good, so we'll see how that goes. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please do like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. All that information is listed in the description box below. And yeah, I hope you guys are having a really great day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!